So what I've realized is this new playoff format is going to change how we talk about college football. I mean, that should have been obvious, but I think now with these results, like some reputations are going to change that if this was a four-team playoff, never would have had the chance to change. Like, for example, James Franklin. He's going to go down as great year for Penn State. They made it to the Final Four, played themselves in. Um, they've looked really good, but honestly, they've had the easiest path. SMU, Boise State. But two big wins for James Franklin, something he's never had, and now Penn State finds themselves in the Final Four, which if it was a four-team playoff, like Penn State would be stoked to make it. However, if this was a four-team playoff, I don't think Penn State would have gotten in based on how the committee seated back with a four-team playoff. You're like, well, hold on a second. They are ranked four in the seating. I think they're ranked four because it was a 12-team playoff, and the committee did not want to punish teams too much who played in the conference championships and lost. Where in years prior, Penn State versus Oregon, that's a play-in game to the playoff for Penn State. You lose it, you're out. The committee would have definitely bumped up Notre Dame to four, and the playoff would have been Oregon, Georgia, Texas, and Notre Dame. Texas would have still gotten in, and you know what they would have done? It would have been Oregon versus Notre Dame and Texas versus Georgia again as the two and the three. And maybe, I don't know, maybe the committee would have been like, well, we don't want to see these teams play each other three times. And they would have bumped Notre Dame all the way up to three and had Texas as four. Maybe I see them doing that. So you could get a different matchup of Texas, Oregon, and then Notre Dame versus Georgia, two different matchups. But anyway, because of the 12-team playoff, we're going to see things differently. Like Ohio State never, like Ryan Day probably gets fired because that Michigan loss cost them the playoff. But now that loss to Michigan is actually, I'm starting to think that's the best thing that's happened to Ohio State because since they lost them, like this woke up a team where everybody said this is the most talented team in college football history, the most expensive NIL, and they were probably coasting on that talent until they lost to Michigan and realized like, hey, no one's going to hand us anything. We got to go out and take it. And that's all they've been doing since playing Michigan. But 14 playoff, they never get that opportunity. Ryan Day gets fired, I'm guessing, for losing to Michigan again. But now, Ryan Day, huge success, two big playoff wins, is in the Final Four and is playing Texas. And huge, like, definitely played himself in and now is viewed differently as a more successful coach. Like, is all this good or bad? However, I don't know. Personally, I it's a mix for me because college football was really, really hard. And it's still really, really hard. Like, there's only so many teams that can win a national championship. But the 12-team playoff, I would actually say, has made it easier to win a national championship. Like, Arizona State was this far away from being into the Final Four. And honestly, with how hard Scatterboo played, they should have been there, man. Bummer that they didn't make it. Um, but Penn State also, right? It would have been another year where Penn State couldn't win the big game to get them into the playoff. But now they're in the Final Four, and now does that momentum of two convincing wins in a playoff big game atmosphere, does that give Penn State momentum where now whether they face Notre Dame or Georgia, that they can handle business and get into the championship? Honestly, I kind of like Penn State to get to the championship, where then they lose again. But that changes the whole perspective on James Franklin. If he gets 3 playoff wins, like you can't say Penn State James Franklin like he doesn't win the big game anymore. But now he has more big games afforded to him. I don't know. I'm going all over the map, but I think you get what I'm saying. Like it changes college football more than I thought. And overall I'd say I was really excited when they added 12 teams. I thought the season was great. And then kind of got towards the end and I was like, ooh, I don't know actually. There's still some things. Like what's the number one thing they need to fix about the college football playoff? This seeding. Like I get the seeding wanting to reward conference champions, but it did not pan out that your number one team, Oregon, got such a tough um, way to get to the championship. Like that should not have happened. And other teams, like again, Penn State got a really easy path to get there, right? Why Penn State gets an easier path than Oregon does, right? There's definitely some things that you can do to fix the seeding. Like the top 4 seeds should just get buys and conference championships. Maybe you could work it out where if you're a conference champion and you don't get that bye, you get a home game. Reward them that way. But then people will be like, why is this better seeded team, right? But you see that in the NFL, there's definitely going to be like Minnesota or the Lions traveling to another team despite having a better record. It's because they were in a tough division and they didn't win their division, right? So seed, give the first top 4 seeds a bye, period. And if you don't get a bye and you're a conference champion, you get a home game. Okay, there you go. And you're basically, if you are a conference champion, you're gonna be not necessarily actually, you're gonna be guaranteed a home game. But I think playoff committee needs to add more home games for the first round, home games for the second round. Then when you're at the final 4, neutral sites. Okay, just like they've done. Honestly, they might end up going to only one neutral, but then they're gonna lose all these bowls still. So that's it. That's just what I've been thinking. Comment, let me know, what have you been thinking?